All right, hello everyone. Who in here has inherited a DNS server before? All right. How many of you have inherited one recently? Oh, good. There's at least one, so that's good. All right. I see a lot of old timers as well. So I will be asking for some live feedback on this at the end. So all of you old timers, please let me know some stuff. This is a fairly new talk. So. All right, so I do a lot of trainings, or I have in the past. I don't do as many anymore, but I do a lot of bind and DNS trainings throughout the globe, and I like to find out like how people got into the DNS. And these are some of my favorite answers. The one at the bottom is my absolute favorite. So voluntold, yeah. My personal story is because I did Unix stuff, right? My first name server was a Sun Spark 1, if that tells you anything. So anyway, we all sort of end up in this, a lot of us end up in this, in the DNS ecosystem. So this talk, and actually it's funny because Vicky says she can't remember me doing this talk, but not only did she introduce it previously, but she asked me this question, and this is how the talk came about. So a lot of what we do at ISC is I have a very interesting job, right? I get to talk to lots of different people, from entry-level DNS admins all the way up to very experienced DNS admins, people that are doing things really, really well and according to best practice, people that are doing things cutting edge, all the way down to someone who doesn't know how to edit a zone file. So we get the whole gamut, right? So another thing I get to do, which people like to ask us to come check out their configurations and their deployments. So that's one thing I get to do, and that's a lot of how this talk got created. But anyway, the idea is say I was dropped into an organization that I almost knew nothing about, what would I do with the DNS? The other thing I want to point out is I do work for ISC, but most of this talk is name server software agnostic. So we're going to talk mostly about DNS protocol. There are some examples. Those are in bind speak because that's what I know how to talk. But I don't think there's anything in here that you can't do with any other DNS software, with the exception of maybe Microsoft. I had to throw that out, right? If you use any of the open source stuff from ISC, NetLabs, the CZ.NIC folks, or the commercial products, you should be able to do all this. All right, yeah, so this is just the fun stuff, right? The first thing I'd do is freak out. So the first thing I did do when I got introduced to the DNS was I did freak out, right? So I knew Unix, and I knew how to keep a service running. That's it, right? I didn't really know how to get data into the thing and how to get data out of the thing, right? So I did kind of freak out. The other part to this that I find in talking with people and how people end up either being successful or not in the DNS is often what you inherit. I was very fortunate that I inherited an infrastructure that the guy who set it up was RFC aware. And we'll talk about RFCs in a bit. But he kind of knew what he was doing, in other words. Now, if I had inherited another infrastructure where it was not done very well, my story might be different, right? Anyway, this guy, some of you old timers may remember the name Tim Seaver. That was, yeah, you do. Anyway, I inherited his infrastructure, and one of the first delegations that I made, we had a locality-based domain that I was hostmaster for. I did it incorrectly, and he let me know that this is not a rubber stamp job, and you should read RFC 1480. So that was my introduction to the RFCs. So I read that, and I never made another improper delegation. Thank you. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is recon. We're going to try to find out what we have, right? What is going on? Now, there's a couple of different levels to this. Before I go to that, probably if I got dropped in, that means stuff isn't working. right? So that's going to be a whole different ball game than the first one that I got dropped into. Stuff was working, right? So when we say stuff is working in the DNS, what do we mean? We probably are saying that clients aren't complaining, customers are not calling, customers are not complaining. This means their questions are being answered. This may or may not mean that they're getting the right answers. It may or may not mean what you think it does. We'll talk about that some. That's one of the beauties of the DNS is it's very resilient by design. Okay. Let's see. So the first thing I'm going to try to do is find any diagrams that are around. This is a very, very lightweight illustration. Okay, so I've found this diagram at this place. The other part of this talk is trying to do this from a perspective of whoever was running this DNS infrastructure before is no longer there. So I don't have anyone to ask questions of, right? That presents a certain unique set of problems. So if I pick this up, I would say, oh, okay, I'm on a private network here. Well, this is interesting. So I have some authoritative servers. I have one recursive server. That's a node in my brain. I probably want to make another recursive server later, right? I don't want one of those. And then, oh, interestingly, I have a root server here on this private network, all right? Okay, that means that I'm running some sort of private root, okay? These are my clients down here. These are the ones that I need to keep happy, whether they're asking questions of any of these servers, okay? I'll do it a little bit now since it's probably appropriate. So a little bit about the DNS ecosystem itself. See, here's the thing. When I first inherited DNS, all I was coming at it from was a systems side of things. Again, I know how to install an OS. I know how to bring up a service. I know how to maintain that service, right? But I didn't know like how DNS actually worked. We think of it in very simple terms as it's a query response protocol, and it is. But those of you that do this or have been doing this for a long time know that it's much more complex than that, okay? So in the ecosystem itself, though, in general, you have these three things. You have these clients that are going to ask DNS questions of your servers. Now, then you have two different types of servers, typically. There's a lot of blurring in this in operational speak, but this is how we want to do it in the perfect world. Oh, hello, Michael. So generally speaking, my clients are going to ask questions of a recursive server. Okay, a client has something on it called a stub resolver, and you configure that. Those of you who are Nix people know etcresolve.conf. You configure that, and that's the server you go ask your DNS questions of if you're the client. Okay, that server then goes out and does work on behalf of that client. So the recursive server then asks some series of authoritative servers the necessary questions in order to get the answer back to the client. Okay, you're hoping that all this goes well enough so that the client gets the answer they want. All right. And then the next thing I would do is I would pick a name server, any one of them. And again, name server software agnostic here. It doesn't matter what its underlying process is. I just want to be on it and see what's happening. Okay. If it's one of the open source variants, I want to know like what version of that software is running. And then I want to check how old is that? Are there any security vulnerabilities for that? And if it's one of these fancy appliances, I want to get as much access to that device as I can and find out as much as I can. Hello, Jeff. All right. For those of you, the two that just walked in and I said hello to, this is a fairly new talk and I'll be soliciting feedback at the end. So I want to know what you would do. What would Jeff Houston do if he was given a DNS server right now today in a new organization? Be thinking about that. All right. So, and then I want to find out things like, what is the OS? Is the OS current? Are things being done well from a general sysadmin perspective, right? How does the DNS service on this box get started? This is very important. A lot of times we run into cases where people say this this process is, well, this DNS process is not doing what it's supposed to do, right? Well, somewhere, some way, someone started the name server process, and then they left or went on or did something, and then the box rebooted or something, and a different version came up or a different config file was used. Yeah, I see some grimaces, but that we run into this, okay? So you want to make sure that the version that's running is the one that you want to be running and is the one that will start running when you restart the box, you know, on purpose or not. And then, is there any nanny script going on? Like if the name server process dies, is there a way that it automatically recovers? Okay. And again, this is all day one, first couple of minutes, you know, after you figure out all your HR stuff, you know, once they give you logins. All right. Again, for those that came in late, the talk is DNS protocol specific and tries to be name server agnostic. However, I am sort of bind is sort of what I have done for many, many years. So I would do you a disservice if I had other name server software that I tried to describe. So the examples will be in bind speak. One of the really handy options that I love to name D is the capital V. So note the difference between, you can run this little v and you can get just the version string, which that's great. But if I just came in and I don't know anything about environment, I want to do the capital V. I want to see what they built this named with. And here I can see things like, well, they changed the prefix dir. That's handy to know. I want to be able to find my files, right? Threads are enabled. Anything else? We're using OpenSSL in this location. La la la. Anyway, you'll find some important things when you do this. Once I've done that, the other thing I'll say here, I'll go back to that sort of thing. When I do this, I notice I didn't specify a path name. So I want to make sure that this thing that responds to this is the one that actually runs when the system starts up. So again, go into your startup scripts, see how your name server software is started, right? A lot of times, again, we've seen this be very different from what is actually running. Okay. All right, then I'm going to start taking a look at configuration. And at first, I'm just going to be looking at very general sense, like, does what meets my eye make sense? And again, the me that would do this today is very different than the me that did this 20 some years ago. I didn't know what the hell I was looking at 20 some years ago. Sometimes today I don't know what the hell I'm looking at. But anyway, it's a little better. So if you're new and you've just inherited a server, I highly recommend, you know, it's the same old RTFM thing, right? Look at the documentation. For every, you know, for me, I'm gonna look through the global options and some of the zone stanzas. I'm gonna make sure it makes sense to my eye. Okay, see if it's anything insane at first. But if you're new, you know, you're gonna have to go through each specific option and figure out in the manual what's going on. What are we trying to achieve by setting this option? I'm gonna do some basic security stuff. Make sure that we're doing zone transfers via TSIG. Yay. Am I allowing transfer of my zone data to other parties? That might be okay if I am, it might not. It depends on the policy at the organization that you're at. And then particularly if I'm on the recursive side, who am I allowing to query my server? More specifically, who am I going to answer if they ask me a question? Right, that's very important, okay? You don't want to be on the list of shame and be an open resolver. Okay. Now I know from personal experience prior to ISC and at other places, sometimes you will be thrown into a situation where you are at a place that has bought 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 a place, and literally there are admins that do not know what IP space is a valid query, right? This happens more than we would like, right? So if you're in that situation, it's very hard to get to this best practice. but please get there for all of us, right? People have done this via, it's tricky politically, right? Because people are paying you for service. And if you start limiting queries, those people start calling and they get upset and they threaten to not pay you for service, generally if you're providing recursive services. So people that have done this have to do this very carefully and strategically, and usually you'll notify your customers, this is what we're doing. We're going to be moving to this best practice. We think we know who you are. We think you're a valid customer, but if you notice any service changes on this date, please do call us. We'll add your IP address, etc. Okay. However you want to handle that. All right. Oh man, the formatting got messed up. All right. Well, this is still a valid global options. It's just not pretty to my eye. So anyway, in my global options here, I'm setting, I don't know how this got messed up. Oh well, it is what it is. I'm setting my directory to be Etsy name DB. This all looks fine to me. I am enabling DNSSEC. All right, well, what I should say is I've landed into a situation where they're doing this. Okay, back to the topic. Okay, so they are doing DNS, they have enabled DNSSEC. I can do eDNS things here. And I am going to do DNSSEC validation. So this tells me I'm going to validate, but interestingly, I'm saying I'm not going to allow recursion from anyone. I'm getting some funny eyeballs. This isn't a lab setup, obviously. So I'm going to allow anyone to query me. All right. So what I'm seeing, like right here, DNSSEC validation, yes. I thought I was on a recursive server, right? Then I got here and I said, well, am I? And then I got here and I'm like, no, this is definitely authoritative, right? Because on the authoritative side, you want to allow queries from anywhere. That's sort of your job, to take in queries and answer them. Okay. But I'm not doing any zone transfers. There could be good reasons for that. I'm not doing any notifies. And again, I know what all this means because this is what I do for a long time. But if you're new, you're not going to know what these things mean. So, you know, check the manual, talk to anybody you know, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, here's another indication that I'm on an authoritative server because I have a key directory. So I'm probably got some DNSSEC signing going on. That's the indication to me. I'm maybe doing some dynamic DNS in that I got some max journal size going on. I'm doing zone statistics. Good. I can put this in my head and say, okay, this is something for me to look at later. Let's look at the stats and see if they seem sane. This is the address I'm listening on. So again, this is in the private range. I'm listening on this v6 address. If this were real world and it was 2001 DB8, :DB8, you're in trouble. You're not listening on that, I hope. That's the example. There was a talk yesterday, I think, about this, that people actually see these configs, that because they want to implement IPv6, they put in an IPv6 address that they're familiar with. This is the this is like sort of the example.com of addresses, right? And then notify source. This is the source that I'm going to be sending notifies out from when my zone files change. Okay, so all this seems fairly okay to me at this point. All right, then, and again, my formatting is really gotten munged somehow, but anyway, it's still valid. Example, I'm going to start looking at my zone stanzas and see what I have set up. Here I have example.com. It's a secondary, or I'm a secondary for it in this example. This is where I get my zone data from, and I'm not going to send out notifies when I get a new zone or new zone data for this. Now, if I'm on this box, I'm going to be making a note that I need to go check out these two boxes. Like that might be next thing I do. Go look at these two. Okay. Because again, if that's within this new organization's control. right? It's a slave server, so it may not be in my control. But if it is, I want to go log into these and see what's going on. Okay. Next thing I would do is I'd take a look at the logging. If you are an absolute new DNS admin, I say this a lot in the classes, is look at the logging when things are going well, right? And this can go back to general sysadmin stuff too. Like, you want to know what your logs look like when there's not a problem, so that you can know what might be the problem when there is a problem, right? DNS logs, based on how you do the logging, can be very chatty. As a person from ISC, you can throw something at me because sometimes our logs don't make sense to actually what's might be the problem. We've had that complaint in the past, right? But you want to know these things in normal operate. What is considered normal operation? If I was just dropped into a place, I would consider things to be normal if customers aren't complaining. If I'm dropped in and there's something going on, then you have no choice. You're just looking at logs, trying to figure out what the problem is at that point. Let's see here. Yeah, so I'm going to look at the logging stanzas in the config, and then I'm going to look at the actual logs. Also, I'm going to look at system logs as well, right? Because I'm still trying to figure out what is the general health of the system that is running the DNS servers. Okay. Again, apologies for the munged up formatting here. I'll have to figure that out. But here I'm saying I'm going to do, what I've found is I've looked at this server, and it turns out that we are doing query logging. Okay. So things that I immediately think about in my head is, of course, this is a bind server. So now I've sort of reduced some of my capacity because I take a performance hit for query logging, right? That's what I see on this server. That's already something that I'm thinking about. So I want to find out things like, is the company that I'm at, is it their policy that we have to query log? Okay. Because if I'm in a situation where I'm not able to handle demand, we don't require query logging. In a pinch, I might turn this off until we get things figured out, right? In this case, I'm keeping 5 versions of this file, logs / query log, and they're going to be of the size 1 meg. Okay, that's fine. Now, one thing, if you're new, is again, logs can be very chatty. So this 1 meg in size may not be sufficient for you to keep the amount of time of logs that you want. Okay, so just general sysadmin there. Severity info, there's lots of different severities I can set, but again, I'm just checking this out. They do have print time yes set, which I'm a big fan of. If I was in this config and they didn't have that, it would be one of the first things I would add, because just from the way my mind works, I like to see what time something is happening, because I usually try to correlate problems noticed versus when, you know, logs started changing or something happened in the logs at that time. And then, yeah, I'm just saying do query log. All right, checkconf is your friend. So it's amazing to me how many of us, how many folks go a very long time being DNS admins without ever knowing about checking your configuration before you start it, okay? Now there's other of us that will just change the config and try it out anyway, but you know, that's our own fault. But a lot of people don't know about this. So in bind talk, it's named-checkconf. And if you add a -z, lowercase z on the end, it'll actually do syntactical checks of the zones that you're authoritative for as well. So it's very handy. If you're on a server that has 300,000 zones, don't use lowercase z, just word of warning, probably won't like it. Unbound has unbound-checkconf, I believe, is the one. And not DNS has, I think if you're doing not-c, I can't remember. Again, that's why I don't have them in my slides. But you're capable of doing this certainly on the open source ones, Power DNS, whatever you're choosing to use. And the commercial tools will have some other way that you check the config before you actually make it live. And I will point out, though, that this is all syntactical checks. If I do a dumb configuration, for lack of a better term, that is syntactically correct, it will still load it. Okay, so it doesn't absolutely protect us from ourselves, but it does provide. It's a good thing. It's a good practice to do. It saved me a lot in general practice. All right. Then I want to see if there's a way that I can, excuse me, if I can control the name server daemon without having to do things like stop and restart, and if there's a way that I can check in with the running daemon. In bind world, it's RNDC. So if I get dropped on a bind server, one of the first things I'm going to do is see if RNDC is configured. If it's not, I'm going to go ahead and run RNDC-confgen-A. Gives me a very quick, does all the config file pieces for me. If I'm able to, I'm going to restart named at that point, and then it reads those configuration pieces, and I'm able to talk to the name server process via RNDC. RNDC is remote name daemon control, I believe. Anyway, I can start doing things. If it has RNDC there, or I can get it going quickly without hurting service, I'll do RNDC status, see what's going on with the name server. I might not do this right at first, but once I get on those other boxes that I'm in sort of in a master-slave relationship with, I can start doing things like triggering notifies. So instead of going in and editing serial numbers and whatnot, I'll fire off some notifies, watch that the zone gets updated. If it doesn't, I need to figure out why it's not. And on the slave side, I may end up doing this just to see some traffic. So RNDC retransfer the zone. So ignore the serial number and just send me what you got, okay? Now, if you're new to all this, some of these terms that I'm talking about, you're gonna be totally confused about, like serial number and retransfer and these things. If you're new to this and you inherited a DNS server, you got some work to do. I'm sorry to say. Most of us learn by trial by fire, right? That was definitely one of them. I didn't know, again, I only knew about service. I didn't know about the protocol specifics at first. So this is brand new for you, and we're recording this as well. So if you're listening at home, you have some learning to do about the protocol, and we'll talk about that in a bit. All right, so once I've done those basic things on that server, then I'm just going to repeat this for however many servers are within my purview, if you will, right? How many of these am I supposed to maintain? I'm going to get login access to all of them, and I'm going to run all those checks, right? Back to that diagram, or any diagrams that I found laying around when I first came in, I'm going to make sure that the configurations that I find match up to my diagrams, because very often what you'll find is diagrams are either outdated or they're just flat wrong, right? So you want to make sure that they match up to what you're given. All right, so here's a couple of fun things. I know it's late in the day. I put these in here mostly to keep everyone awake. So yeah, there's some DNS personality disorders. One of these is from Mr. Houston, the one at the bottom, all right? The DNS is quite OCD, right? There's good news and bad news in all this, right? The good news is most of the time, I talked about this at first, most of the time your clients are happy, right? They're getting their answer, or they're getting some answer, and they're okay with it, right? If your phones aren't ringing, you might, if you're very early on, you might think everything is okay. If you've been doing this a long time, I don't know, I always kind of worry that something's going wrong, right? The DNS is fascinating. I'm glad it works. So anyway, clients and resolvers are going to keep retrying. Jeff does a talk on zombie queries, and what's the longest query you've seen retry or be asked again? 5 years. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so there's a client somewhere that has been trying to get an answer for 5 years, and it keeps on going. So, or not, yeah. All right, passive aggressive. So on the authoritative side of things, if you have a list of servers, and typically, we're talking about the other thing I'd be looking for, like when I landed somewhere, is if I'm running authoritative service, do I have, number one, do I have more than one name server, right? In a zone file, you only have to have one NS record. You only have to have one authoritative server, but in practice, this isn't good. You want to have multiple name servers, and you want them to be geographically and network dispersed, right? So this is the other thing I would start looking at. The good news about the DNS protocol is if you have a list, if say I had 4 name servers and 3 of them are not working, in general practice, the clients will still be happily resolving my domain, right? Because of the way the thing is architected, the 3 that are down are going to be penalized. So they're not going to be asked questions as often as the one that's working, right? So your clients may not know that there's a problem going on when actually there is some pretty massive problems. So that's a bit of the good news, bad news, right? Sometimes this works in your favor, sometimes not. What else? Yeah, okay. All right, here's the other one. Is anybody else excited about this Sunday's show coming up? No? No other fans? Okay, but anybody know who this guy is? Okay, there's a few people. Okay, right. This guy's kind of a ruler of an apocalyptic world, and this is one of his sayings: there are rules, and they keep us safe. Okay, so for us, this is the RFCs, right? So remember I said, if you're new to all this, this is your homework. All right, and the bad news is there's about, yeah, don't read all of these, but don't have to read the deprecated ones unless, that's for recreational reading, but definitely start with like 1034, 1035. There's a whole bunch of these, right? There's like 4 or 5 slides worth of this, right? If you go here, we have a handy link that has all the DNS related RFCs. So if you are curious about a specific part of the DNS, you may be able to find out where you can read about it there. Of course, you can always just Google for it, right? But the RFCs are where you go to find out what the proper behavior should be. Now, I will note that a lot of name servers do not follow proper behavior. Mine has certainly been guilty of that in the past. Probably currently there's something we don't know about that's not proper. But anyway, this is where you find what proper behavior is. If you're seeing something different, then you can talk to the name server vendor about maybe changing that. Let's see. All right. So I put this one in here just for general review. I'm not, because I wasn't sure if we would have a bunch of new folks. This is what I talked about before. This is the DNS ecosystem. This is an extremely simplified view of it, right? We have my client that's going to ask questions. We have a recursive server that's going to answer questions on its behalf. And then these are the servers that it's going to have to talk to. If this name server has just started up and it has nothing in its cache, then it follows what's called a root.hints or root hints file. So it has the names of and the IP addresses of the 13 root name servers, right? It's going to ask that question. It's going to ask for the IPv4 address in this case of www.example.com. If it's got nothing in its cache, it's going to ask each of these based on current design. There is new QNAME minimalization things that may change this, but as it stands, we're going to ask the root server, what is the address of www.example.com? The root server is going to say, I don't have that answer, but I have some information that you might find handy. And that is the list of the com.dot servers, right? This is called a referral in DNS speak. And then, so it's going to ask the GTLD servers, that same question. And the same thing is going to happen. I'm going to give you back a referral. This is the machine that you need to talk to about example.com. then that query goes there. We can get an answer from there, and we're done, right? This is all really nice and pretty, except that usually you have, of course, you have lots of these. You have lots of clients. You also usually have, hopefully, you'll have several recursive servers. This will be the one that this will be one of the things I'd be looking at if I drop somewhere. How many recursive servers do I have? How many clients are they serving? What's their queries per second? We'll talk about that some more in a bit. But then we know we have 13 of these, and by 13 I mean there are 13 root servers, but they are actually spread all over the world via Anycast. So I don't know what the current number of total root servers is, but it's quite a lot. Same thing for these. There's going to be, I think there's at least there's 13 of those as well, and they're spread all out. So depending on the GTLD. Now for this one, it can be one, but if this is me, if I'm example.com, again, I'm going to be looking for how many authoritative servers am I actually running? Are they getting the data from the true master? Is that where I want the data to be coming from or not? But what I'm trying to say is this is a very simple description of a very messy process, okay? There's all sorts of algorithms that figure out which of these I'm going to talk to, which of these I would talk to. So there's a lot going on. All right. The one thing I was going to say about this is, like if you, when I very first looked at that configuration today, and I saw that there was a keys directory, and I was doing DNSSEC. If I was brand new to this, if you fall into something, God help you, I hope that the first server you get on isn't like doing heavy duty DNSSEC, but if it is, it's all good. You've actually come at a very much nicer time in the history of DNSSEC as far as implementation, so consider yourself lucky. You know, I would want to go, if I wasn't familiar, I would want to go and read the relevant RFCs for DNSSEC, right? I would also, probably, before I do that, I would look at the documentation for the vendor software that I have about how to implement DNSSEC, right? Okay. All right, so back to this. So now that you kind of know about the ecosystem, these are the things that I would do next. All right, I've already logged in. I've already looked at stuff. All right. Well, the view that I get on the ground may or may not be the view that the rest of the world sees, right? So if I'm running authoritative service, the next things I'm going to do are I'm going to go put my domains into DNSViz. I'm going to put it into this dnscheck.iis.sc, and I'm going to get these reports back. And that's going to give me a good indication of how my authoritative service is looking to the world, right? Another one is one that ISC does. All these are free, by the way. You can type in your domains and you're good. ednscomp.ic.org is a really good one as far as, so far we've talked about, like, if I'm doing authoritative service, people are getting to my name server unimpeded, right? But very often there are firewalls in front of things. And so this tool has been really good at detecting if a firewall is doing something wrong with what is trying to get to your authoritative server. And by wrong, I mean wrong in a protocol sense, not wrong and they're trying to do something bad to you, right? You have a valid query coming in, your server should respond in some valid way. And this tool will tell you if that response is not valid. Okay. And very often, you know, a lot of the DNS software, those problems are mostly resolved in this case, but there's still some firewalls out there that do tricky stuff. Then if I find myself in a place where I'm doing either heavy duty recursive or I'm just doing recursive services for clients on a network, then I'm just going to start firing off some queries, right? I'm going to use dig. I'm going to dig at those name servers, and I'm going to dig for various things, right? So in the prior example, you know, authoritative servers are supposed to answer for the world. So that's why I can query from outside. if I'm sitting somewhere, I'm going to dig at those. I'm going to dig at my recursive servers and see if they're answering correctly. If I have access to some box somewhere else off network, then I'm going to fire recursive queries at those servers as well, personally. And I want to make sure that they're giving the right answers. I want to make sure that they're answering my queries from proper, if I'm within the proper IP space. If I'm not within the proper IP space, I want to make sure that they aren't answering queries. Okay. Be very careful with this kind of stuff, because I have been to places where people have assured me that, oh, well, we don't patch that server because you can't reach it from the outside. And like, okay, you know, and I've gone back the next day with a screenshot of my dig that says, I just fired a bunch of queries at your box and it answered, you know. So that was, there was one event that was very fun. But anyway, yeah, the work I was there to do, we had to pretty much shut that down and just get to patching servers. So anyway. All right. So, wow, I'm running really, really early on time, I think, but I don't think you'll be upset. All right. So that was the first day. Things I would do after that, and these are just important, if not more, than the things on the first day. The first day, is triage, right? You're just trying to figure out what's happening. What do you have? Then I'm going to meet with these teams. I realize in some cases, particularly where you may inherit your first DNS server, you may be all these teams, right? So if that's the case, you're going to have to find out. You're going to have to ask yourself. You're going to have a conversation with yourself, right? You have to ask yourself these questions. But if you end up in a place, these days, there's a lot of separation of function, which in theory is a really good thing. But I want to talk to the provisioning team, and I want to know, okay, I know I have this number of servers. How long does it take you to provision a new box? If I called you right now and said, oh, disk died on such and such, how long before you give me a new box? Because with that, you can make different decisions based on how you want to plan your network. For the operations team, we're going to ask them, how's your life, right? Are their eyes all sunken and they look stressed and not happy? This means you've been dropped into a place where the DNS, if they're only DNS specific, that the DNS is going to need some work, right? That you want to make those people happy. You want to make them not get called, okay? Also with them, you're going to ask them, like, if they are in bad shape, like, what sorts of problems have you been having? What's been going on? What has the complaint been? A lot of times with DNS, you'll find that sometimes people don't know what the root cause was. So you'll have to ask things like, well, what was the complaint that came in? What was the problem, the issue that was noticed? And how was it resolved? And sometimes you'll find, well, it just went away, is the quote, right? That's the one you're going to have to investigate and see how you can prevent that in the future. Okay. Yeah, then we're going to talk to the security team. We're going to make sure that they know that DNS takes place over TCP and UDP port 53, and that should be okay, right? Still, amazingly, you'll find people that believe DNS is only UDP 53. Okay. There's some other ports involved as well, but you'll want to talk to them about what they limit for DNS and what they don't. Okay. Yeah, and then monitoring. I want to know, like, what has caused your recent alerts. What has caused any alerts in the past? What are you triggering on, right? If a system is running high on CPU, do I get alerted for that? If it's running out of memory, do I get an alert for that? That's sort of general sysadmin stuff. But in DNS terms, like, are you going to alert me when my traffic peaks over a certain level, right? Whatever that level may be for your infrastructure. So what are you currently alerting on, and maybe we'll add some things. Then if I talk to the architecture team, it's going to be about, well, I've dropped into a situation where there's some operational problems. So is there a plan that's in progress over how to re-architect the network? Probably not, right? So this may be your job too. And then this is an interesting one. So a lot of people don't think about this, but I like when I do get dropped into places based on my current job. I like to talk to these folks because a lot of the management folks don't even know what DNS is, right? Which is always amazing, right? We all know in here that if the DNS breaks, we know that the internet is not broken, right? Kind of, right? We can get around by IP address, right? The masses cannot, right? My boss is going, so I'll say management doesn't know how to get to places by IP addresses, right? Actually, he does. But anyway, I want to make sure that they're aware of the criticality of DNS to what they are offering. If you're an ISP, to your customers, it looks like your network is broken when your DNS is broken. I want to make them aware that depending on what situation I fall into, right? A lot of places don't have any sort of recourse other than an old gruff sysadmin and Google, right? If they run into a problem, that's really that's their troubleshooting, right? So I want to make them aware that you're putting you put a lot of money into your other infrastructure. Routers are not cheap. Maybe put a little bit into your DNS. That's all. And then if I get dropped there, I want to see if they have support, right? If they're running one of the commercial products, DNS products, they probably do. If they're running something else, they might not. So I like to find that out. And then I want to encourage them to do things. Like Keith, you'll like this. This is a plug for DNSOARC. But if you like NANOG, or if you kind of like NANOG, but you're primarily a DNS person, you'll love DNSOARC, right? So it's like 2 days of NANOG, but it's all specific to DNS. So I love it. Back when I was a young man, and I used to come to NANOGs and be like, oh, yeah, okay, there's like one DNS session, right? This is like 2 full days. It's great. Join some lists, DNS ops, run by DNSOARC, NANOG, of course, so you can start to learn about events that are happening. Hopefully you won't learn about events that are happening at your network before you know about it on these lists, but you might. So it's a good idea to join them. And that's really it. So I've run really fast, so my apologies. However, I did say at the beginning that this is really the first time I've given this at a conference. So for those you seasoned DNS people, if you were asked that same question, like what would you do if you were dropped into a new environment? What other things should I add to this talk? Yep, and please do use the mic. Please introduce yourself. This is being recorded, so there you are. Go ahead, Dwayne.
Hi, Dwayne Muscles from VeriSign. Mm-hmm. So this is a bit of a self-serving plug, but there's a tool that I wrote called DNS Top, which I think would be useful for someone in such a position. It's basically, packet capture that shows you the queries coming in. And as you said before, it's the kind of thing you should run under good times so right. That you know what to expect, so that you can tell the difference between the good times and the bad times.
Okay. Where can one find this tool other than Googling for it?
Well, it's actually in quite a bit of the open source operating system packages. It's on
good
Linux and FreeBSD, and so it's in most of the package managers.
Okay. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
Michael O'Neill from Marin. One of the things I would look for is, are you in a jail? Are you in some sort of rooted environment? That would be one thing that your talk might address.
Yes.
In future.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Matt Poundstead. I was going to suggest, sort of related to the monitoring questions. Are you collecting statistics? Are you, so that you can go and look at the long-term activity on the server, and not just the, not just alerting on changes, but actually like consistent measurement of what's going on, so that you can go look at pretty graphs of your query rates and things like that. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Brad Passwater, Salesforce. I have 3 comments. One is, from a business service perspective, who are your customers and what service do they actually need? Because while DNS is this great generic thing,
yeah,
some people need very different things. Like they need their zone stuff to be pushed out every millisecond if you're running a cloud infrastructure. So you need to know what you have to deliver. How do you get access to your registrar accounts? And then I would make sure that you update all the email aliases that do hostmaster and DNS things to point to you, because now you're in charge.
Thank you, especially for that last one, because I meant to add that slide this morning. So thank you. Keith?
Keith Mitchell, DNSOR. Thanks, Eddie, for the plug. We're
worries.
also beta testing a new validation tool called Check My DNS, which basically will exercise your resolver in all kinds of ways. So you something people might want to add to their list.
Excellent. Thank you.
Eric Muller, Network Utility Force. One other thing that I noticed that you didn't really mention, and sort of touches on in the security stuff towards the end there, but is NTP on, audit the accounts that are there,
Right.
general host hardening. Is this something that was, end of life 4 years ago and never been patched?
Yes.
Basic host security too.
Gotcha. Cool. Yes, Michael.
Mike Sinatra, yes. This was really good. And I am causing feedback, I think. What it triggered in me a lot of was how I want to not make my DNS servers look like some archaeological dig that somebody's going to have to go through and find stuff out when I get hit by a bus.
Yes.
So I think that covering some of that a little bit more explicitly might help. Maybe go into day 3. Now it's time to start documenting the things that you figured out. And if you are already know what you're doing as a DNS person, how do you document it? How do you make your configurations look readable? How do you make sure that the logging is the way you want it and that sort of thing? So just really so that you can, how do you put a DNS server into a handoffable kind of state? And I don't know, you start to touch upon some of that with your day 2 stuff, but how do you keep that going? I think would be something you could add on to this a little bit.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, and the other thing I've thought about too while people were talking is like, I didn't really cover like, well, how, if I'm running an authoritative server, how do I make changes? Like, what's the process for getting data in, modifying data? All those things are important. And so if you're talking to those operations folks, that's likely who does that. And you want to find out what process they use. Is it modern? Are they still doing VI? Et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Thanks, Michael.
Dwayne Wessels from VeriSign again. So I thought of something else. I like that you mentioned the RFCs, and one of the recent RFCs in particular I think is very useful is the terminology draft, because as people who might be new to DNS, sometimes it's easy to use the wrong terms, and when you're asking questions of experts, using the right terms would be very, very useful.
Yes. Thanks. Mr. Houston.
I'm Jeff Houston, yes. One of the things that's kind of really important on day 1 is to understand what you are, whether you're an authoritative name server being a primary, and there are other folk leeching the zone off as secondaries, whether you're a secondary, and whether you've got accurate copies and you actually are in touch with the primaries, or whether you're a recursive resolver and understanding the clients. Now, you went through the last stage, but the first 2 are interesting, and you didn't actually touch this idea of a secondary. And having been thrown into a job where I was basically a promiscuous secondary, it's a nightmare of a job. And trying to understand what are crap zones and how long should I sort of try and fetch zones before I just stop serving them was actually really a bit of a nightmare for me. And it's kind of those 3 roles are different and quite distinct. And it's kind of decision-making lines in your job and running this stuff are actually different for each of those 3 roles.
And I did, one of the things I did talk about was like I'd test out firing off notifies if I was on the master, and I'd test out trying to pull in zone transfers if I was a slave, but along those same lines. But yeah, how long did you wait before you expired the zone back in your example?
Well, it was up to me. It was an hour. It was up to marketing. It was a month, and marketing won. You know.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
How dare you piss them off?
Okay.
The other thing I was going to mention, though, is the other thing is about understanding normality. And you actually went through this a little bit. But one of the real problems with the DNS is sometimes the folk who start querying you go insane, batshit crazy. Either it's an attack or they just simply have gone crazy. Understanding normality and alarming and indeed instrumenting non-normality is really important because it's so easy to submarine a server with enough queries. And most of the time, most of the queries are insanely repetitive. But if you're not looking, you know, the server just goes out to lunch and life is hell. So instrumenting normality is actually a really critical day one kind of task. You know, you've got to understand what is normal operating parameter.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that also reminded me too, is that I talked about the ecosystem and authoritative and recursive on my slides were all separate. But operationally, we certainly find a lot of folks that sort of do what's called mixed function. And that is something that you would certainly want to be aware of very soon within inheriting an environment. Are you answering recursive queries for some clients on an authoritative server? In general, don't do that, but it's something you would want to find out. Oh, and I'm looking at Ed Lewis now, and I'm thinking, if you're, he's hiding. He said he was going to heckle, but he hasn't yet. So, you know, if you find that to follow on to his talk earlier, if you find that you're doing DNSSEC validation on a resolver, you need to be aware of things like this root key rollover that's happening, and you want to make sure that your config is proper for that. If you're listening from the recorded talk, be sure to check back for Ed Lewis's I Can talk on the root KSK rollover if you need more information on that. Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you all very much. I know we finished a little early, but I suspect you won't be mad. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks a lot for the candid feedback. I really appreciate it. And now Benson's going to come up, and he has some announcements.